Welcome back to another episode of That's Business. Today's guest, Tami Dean, is an experienced educator, speaker, presenter, and writer. She's the CEO and founder of Dragonfly Rising, an equity and education consulting company. Dr. Tami believes in the power of education and building community and relationships rooted in equity and social justice for all students and staff. Tami, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today. First and foremost, before we dive into the just badassery that is you, and I think you have the best headshot I've ever seen, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you always know you wanted to be in education or in social justice movements? But tell us about that if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the cliche educator where I always thought I wanted to be a teacher.
Awesome.
So I was the dorky kid that took home all the stuff over summer and played school with my neighborhood kids, and I was the teacher. So I always thought I wanted to be a teacher or educator. I took a little detour for a while where I thought I might want to be an interior designer or a lawyer.
Oh.
Yeah. But always came back to the educator space. So that's just where I ended up. I don't know if I was always passionate about the social justice part. I've always been very much like an advocate about things that were wrong. I think animals were really more my passion. Like it was a younger person, like the World Wildlife Federation, right? With the panda.
Oh, yes.
They said the panda.
Mm-hmm. I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Oh, yeah. I had their sticker and everything on my clarinet case because I was in band. I was also a band nerd. But yeah, so I've always been passionate about what I believe in. That's the common theme. But yeah, I always kind of knew I wanted to be a teacher.
Okay. So we go through middle school, high school, college, because you have that PhD too. So walk us through kind of that chunk of the teen years into how you ended up with this badass PhD and trying not to fast forward into you starting your own company. But what led up to that? Because you obviously did corporate first, but let's hear it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So went to college right out of high school. I actually ended up going to a private liberal arts school. Actually, the first one in my family to go straight from high school into college. So,
wow, congrats. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. So that was an interesting path to navigate, right? Because I'm also Gen X. So we just, did all the things on our own. Mm-hmm. But went in, I actually double majored in college. I had a music scholarship. I played clarinet. And so I actually was a double major, started with music performance in elementary education. And then that was a lot to do music performance, but I still ended up with both a bachelor's in music and in education, but not music education. That's a very important distinction. Although, fun fact, I did end up teaching music for a year at one point in my career.
I did not know you ended up still getting not music education, but that you were going to college that route first. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's always a surprise. I have a friend that's always like, you always have these little nuggets of surprise.
You do.
I like to keep it interesting.
Yes.
Drop them every once in a while. So loved education. Actually, my undergraduate experience is where the catalyst for my equity work started. I read Dreamkeepers as a part of my undergraduate education and prep. And it just kind of lit the fire around culturally responsive teaching and equity in education. And so that was really kind of the trajectory that kind of moved me into, my master's and those kinds of things. So graduated, right? Was a teacher, didn't want to be a middle school teacher.
Don't blame you there.
But that was where my first full-time gig ended up being, right? This is the story of my career. Nothing happened the way I thought it would, period.
That's it. That's all we need to know.
That's it. End of the story. But I ended up, I did a few different things, right? Because when I graduated college with my education degree, that's when actually there was an abundance of educators. And it was really hard to get an education job. So I subbed. I was a TA. I had applied for a position. I actually got called down into Texas, interviewed at a district in Texas, because I had a kindergarten. My certification is K-8, but they wanted me to paddle children.
Oh,
so
literally?
Yes, literally.
Oh my God. Okay. What year are we in? Jeez. Okay. Jesus. All right.
Yes. And it was one of those, you're young, you're looking for a job, and they were like, do you want the job or not? Yes or no? Like this super high pressure decision. like in this moment. And I'm like, and I had flown down there with my boyfriend, who eventually became my husband, who's now my ex-husband at the time. Like, yeah, whoop, whoop. Do you want to move here? Anyway, I ended up having a most horrible migraine because it just was so conflicting with my values and what I believe. Like, I ended up calling and saying, I'm sorry, I cannot do this job. They're like, you'll never do education in the state of Texas again, which is irony, of course, if you think about it.
What? Right. Oh my God. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying to stop my comments, but okay, go ahead.
No, it's okay. So I end up, staying in Illinois because that's where I went to college, was in Illinois. I went to Illinois Wesleyan and ended up getting a job in a middle school because I had a middle school certification. Like, while I was going to school, they were like, oh, if you take this one other course, you get this middle school certification. And I was like, oh, I'm already double majoring in the two majors that have the most outside time in classes. Like, some of my courses were like 0.25 credit or 0 credit in music. Like, it was insane. It was insane.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked full time. So, like crazy things. But taught middle school, loved it. Loved it. I got a chance. I was in a middle school concept, working with a team of great teachers. I had another co-teacher who was teaching reading and writing like I was. And she and I ended up working on our masters together. I did some research around culturally responsive text and instruction and engaging, working in a really low SES school where a lot of these students were not even afforded opportunities to engage with, music and art and foreign language and, have texts that they're interested in, right? Like, none of these things. So when I was teaching, I had a wide range of students in this middle school. Some of these kids were, ranging from like a 2nd grade reading level to a 10th grade reading level in one class, right?
Wow.
So yeah, great kids. So did my research there. That's where I ended up, teaching music because my principal at the time did not care for my colleague and I because we collaborated too much and the students connected with us.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I know, horrible things you would never want.
Awful. You're the worst. How dare you?
The worst educator ever, right? And so this is where the funny part of the story is. So he really wanted to separate us, right? Because I feel like when leaders are, how do I want to say this? Feeling, what is the word for that? Intimidated, maybe?
Yeah.
By the quote unquote power, for lack of a better word, of people who are connecting with other people, right? They need to do something to interrupt that.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think this particular principal purposely surrounded himself with young teachers thinking that they would just do whatever he wanted because the majority of our school that he hired were all really new teachers. So, newsflash, I know this is going to be a surprise to you. I've always been a little feisty.
No, really?
Yeah. Well, okay, not until high school. As a child, I was quiet and shy.
That's how I was. I was up until honestly like high school into college. And I think it was like this traumatic relationship I had. Then I was like, fuck this. Why am I this way? So I was the same way. No one ever believes me that knows me now. I'm right there with you, but I get it. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I love it. Yay! Because they're like, no. I'm like, really? And I don't know what it was, but there was, I love that you have a story for that. I don't even know what the catalyst was. I don't know. So he was always calling me out of my classroom, like while I was trying to teach. And like to the point where my students were like, oh my gosh, what did you do now?
That's bad.
Right?
Yes.
It's so bad, right? Because they were calling me over the intercom.
Like you're a bad student?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and they would send like the school resource officer up to watch my class so I could go. Now, mind you, I had a 45-minute planning period, and then I had a 45-minute chunk of time with my team where we planned. So out of those 90 minutes, you couldn't have met with me when I didn't have students. You always had to call me when I didn't have students.
Right.
So calls me to tell me that we had cycled through some music teachers. Music teachers were having some challenges and calls me in. Well, we're going to need to move you out of teaching reading and language arts next year. We're going to need you to teach music.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, so technically I'm qualified to teach music in the state of Illinois because I have enough credit hours to do that.
Right. Yeah.
But I did say to this principal, I said, you do know I don't really play piano and I don't sing. Like I played clarinet. So I'm not sure that I'm the person to be teaching general music.
Right.
They play piano a lot, like, and they sing. Like, I mean, I sing, I just don't sing well. Like I sing for myself, right?
Yes.
Like, let's be real.
There's a difference, right?
Oh, there's a total difference, right? Like I'm not a music teacher singer.
Mm-hmm.
So either way, we want you to teach music. So I left and I went home and I thought about this. Well, anyway, it turns out I was pregnant with my son. So I'm like, I can do anything for a year. I don't want to look for a job while I'm pregnant, right? I could do anything for a year. So I came back in the fall to teach music, but I decided to revamp the music program to actually make it exciting, relatable to students. Like they had these horrible music books, like, you know, those horrible songs like Blow the Man Down?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Everything. That's what the music book was. I'm like, this is horrible. This is why these kids don't like it. So we were like researching the history of music and how music influenced and how hip hop and R&B and, you know, influenced other genres of music, and did all of this like study into how music has influenced other genres of music. And then they got to write music and study music. Okay. So they were all excited. And of course my students were like, this is so much like your reading class. Yes. But with music.
There's a theme here. Right.
So I got in trouble.
Again.
I got in trouble because my students were too loud and excited with music during music class.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a traveling teacher. So I'm pregnant with a cart, like going from room to room, right?
Oh,
traveling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Traveling. I didn't have a music classroom. Anyway, the students were excited. And, you know, there's a lot of things that were happening there, right? Like they were violating our union contract, trying to make us as specials teachers, like do this extra duty. I was like, no, my contract says I get this, right? And my principal had an older person on this specials team, right? Like the PE, art, music teachers, try to come talk to me and tell me to not make that a big deal, that I needed to be quiet.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, no, I don't think so, because I'm actually by contract supposed to have this time without students. And if I am going to be with students, then they need to pay me, right? Because that's a contract. So this is the fun story where then I ended up going on bed rest with my son. And I was never evaluated because there was an evaluation procedure and process, right? We're supposed to come in and observe you X number of times, teaching, you know, all these things were outlined based on the union contract with the school district. Never did any of that. So I'm on bed rest with my son and I get, gosh, it probably was a phone call because, you know, at that time we didn't really have 24/7 access to email on cell phones.
Yep.
You know, phone call asking if I could come in. And I said, no, I am on bed rest, medical leave. So I ended up getting a pink slip in the mail without an evaluation. But that's okay, because this is where I sued the school district and won because they violated all the due process and procedures and, you know, got that removed from my record because that never should have happened.
And I want to take a moment for this because I knew this story already. If you're listening and you're like, why isn't Angela freaking out? Because I already freaked out when she told me the first time. So, but because so many people have these stories and situations, I have 2-3 friends right now going through this with their employers for similar reasons. One's pregnancy, one's so many other stories. We could do another podcast on that. But what made you do that? And of course, being the fiery person that you are, you're kind of saying, oh, hell no, this is not happening. But because it's a lot of work. I mean, you very easily, you're pregnant, you're on bed rest. I mean, what made you do it instead of just like, oh, well, woe is me, like a lot of people, I'm sure, would have done?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think because I knew he was wrong and he was lying and he was going to do it to somebody else. I have a really hard time when something really butts up with my values and that what is true and right and good. And I know that I didn't do these things, right, that he's saying. And that really has a negative impact on my entire career. And I'm a really young teacher. And so I was very fortunate that I had the backing of a union and union support with this lawsuit. I feel very fortunate to have had that. And that was very helpful. And, my husband, we were married at the time, was very supportive as well. So I think all of those things together. And I just really am like, no, you don't get to do this to me. Right. So he would never admit it. They never admitted it. So we ended up going to court. So I had to go testify with like my brand new, like month old baby. And I'm nursing and bringing my baby into the courtroom. And, the best day was when he perjured himself on the stand. And that pretty much ended the process. They were like, okay, here you go. We don't need to go anymore. But that was such a fabulous day. The sad part is he continued to be a principal, not in that like he was there for a little bit and then wasn't, but then was able to come back to the district years later. But he didn't really change, right? It didn't change him at all, which is the really sad part. But that opportunity led me to an opportunity I never would have taken. I had, I'd finished my master's research and had done a lot of work around assessment. And I had applied for this district level curriculum coordinator job. I really wanted to be a 612 literacy coordinator. I'd actually applied for a couple jobs in this school district. And the first one I did an interview for was to be a reading recovery teacher. And I was very honest about what was happening with this other school district because I wasn't going to lie because, you get caught lying, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one person interviewing wanted me, the principal was like, oh, I don't think we should get involved with someone who's in ongoing litigation with another school district. I was like, okay. Then like the following week, I had another interview for this district level position with like the deputy superintendent.
Ooh, fancy.
Another assistant superintendent, a couple directors, right? And before I even got home, this is the funniest part. They called me and said, hey, we know you interviewed for this job, but we think you'd be perfect for this job. So they offered me a district assessment coordinator job. It had never existed before. I had need to build this whole system, build the role. I was 27 years old.
Wow.
And I accepted the job. So that put me into a district level position. And the funniest part is the teacher leader who wanted to hire me, whose principal said no, I actually ended up working with her on this coordinator team. She's like,
oh, amazing.
I know. She's like, yes. But she's like, I wanted you so bad. It's like, well, I was meant for this. So that was fabulous. Introduced me to a lot of things. I had always thought I wanted to get my doctorate in curriculum and instruction to be like an assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction to help, select materials that made sense for students. What I realized a lot of that work that I thought it was not what it was while I was in the district office. So that was a little disheartening, to be honest. So during this time, I have another baby because my kids are 14 months apart, get divorced. And this is, 2006, 2007, gas started to get like 5, 6 ridiculous amounts per gallon.
Mm-hmm.
I was commuting 55 minutes each way.
Oh.
So it was getting very expensive. Really wasn't getting the support that I should financially from my ex-husband. And so I had to make a decision. So in very Tami style, a research assistant position popped up at Illinois State. I was like, okay, I am going to take my exam. I'm going to apply for the doctorate program. And I'm going to apply for this research assistant position. And if I get this role, then I'm just going to quit my job and I'm going to go work on my doctorate full time. Because I would be better off financially doing that than what I was doing full time, which everyone told me I was crazy. Yeah. This is not the first time in my career. Everyone told me I was crazy because I would have had tenure. If I would have come back in the fall, I would have had tenure because I had been there 4 years. Anyway, so I got the research assistant job, ended up starting my doctorate. Had a wonderful connection with the colleagues there. They were just so supportive and mentoring. So that's where I continued, really dove deep into my social justice, learning, advocacy, research, and then literacy as well. So did that for 5 years and taught college. And that's how I got my doctorate, which then led me to, I didn't go get a professor job because even though one was offered to me because it didn't align with what would be good for my family because they were talking about those kids, right? And I'm like, can't really bring my kids into that.
Right.
Yeah. So done lots of things, took a couple other, my story's long. I feel like I keep going on and on and on, but
No, you saved me from asking questions. You're doing great.
How much more do you want to know about this story?
I'll interject here, but no, this is great. I'm like eating my popcorn here. I'm like, yeah, you're awesome. This is great. So we come up with the idea for Dragonfly Rising, and I want you to give kind of why the name Dragonfly Rising and what is the premise of the company and what you do. And you also have a podcast, which you did not include in your bio, Missy.
Yes, I did. The Equity Hour is my podcast.
Oh, I have it. No, I do have it on the link. Not in the bio piece to read, but that you're the host of it.
Yes, I did.
But she has podcasts too. Head to the show notes. But go ahead.
Yes, I did share it in my bio. I don't know what happened. But anyway, yes. Okay, so we jump forward a bunch of years. Speed walk through my career. So Dragonfly Rising. So I had to make a shift in what I was doing with my career last spring. I've had so many people say to me for a number of years, why aren't you doing this? You should be doing this for yourself. You should be doing this for yourself. So here we are at this crossroads, for lack of a better word. I had lost my sister to colon cancer in August of 2022. And, when something like that happens, like it just changed my whole life, right? Oh, I'm going to cry. Oh my gosh.
You could cry. You're not the first one to cry on this podcast. Won't be the last. Go ahead. I'm on Lexapro, so it doesn't allow me to cry. So it's okay. Otherwise, I would with you.
Oh my gosh. So lost her, and I really felt like I kind of lost my way a bit, but it just changes your whole life, right? So I've always been kind of this person that I want to do something, I'm going to figure out and find a way to do it. I'm not one to not try to live life, right? What her passing did was like amplify that for me. So when this crossroads hit and people were saying this, I'm like, yes, why don't I do that? And I struggled so much with the name for a while. Like I was jotting things down. My friends will tell you I'm really good about being like, what do you think about this? Give me your thoughts. Which is so funny because I take it into account, but at the end of the day, I usually go with my instinct anyway, or what I want. But I appreciate like the sounding board. So shout out to my friends for always being my sounding board and biggest cheerleaders, right, around this, because they still are really much huge cheerleaders for Dragonfly Rising. And so I was talking with a woman I met, actually one of my boudoir photographers. She has her own business. Yes. Amplifying women and all the things. And I was asking her about how she came up with the name of her business, really just trying to get some perspective because I'd never named a business before.
It's hard.
It is. And I had jotted some things down and had not told anybody, actually. And I really believe in like divine intervention. I really feel like God in various parts of my life has come and had somebody else say something to me as confirmation of something, right? And it's just, I always get like little chills and things. And this woman, which I also think is important, she's an atheist too. So, like the mission.
That is important,
right? Like this comes to me. And so we were in this chat, we were texting. I can't even remember how it came out, but we ended up with this like Dragonfly Rising. And it just spoke to me because in the colorectal cancer community, a dragonfly is a symbol of your loved one reappearing and being with you. Okay.
Oh, I have goosebumps.
And
that's incredible.
Rising is me. So the dragonfly is my sister. The rising is me because I've actually been through some really challenging personal experiences, some abusive relationships and things. And I have a tattoo on my foot and with a phoenix that says, "Still I rise." So the Dragonfly Rising is kind of my sister and I coming together. And the colors are blue for the colorectal cancer, color blue, green, which is my sister's favorite color, and yellow, which is my favorite color. And it was so perfect. And why I didn't end up going with Dragonfly Rising early on was, everyone's like, your business should say what it is, right? Dragonfly Rising says nothing about equity, right? But I was like, but this is the story. And equity is about story and narrative and community and life and people and experience. And I don't know a better story than this one. So that's the story of Dragonfly Rising and how it got its name.
And it's such a beautiful name because it makes you think of some type of empowerment. Like, okay, you think of rising. Rising is one of my favorite words. I mean, it's just, what does this mean? Rising from something traumatic that happened, like a phoenix, or it has so many different definitions. And I feel that's the intriguing piece where people would want to learn more, just be like, okay, well, like, what does that exactly mean? So I think it's genius. And everyone always has an opinion of how you should run your business. Everyone.
Yes, that is true. And there's probably like no quote unquote right way, right? It's what makes sense for you.
Exactly. So we start Dragonfly Rising, which you gave me goosebumps from that story. And that is an incredible story. Tell us more on, of course, talking about equity and social justice and all. What is the aim of Dragonfly Rising and what you do day to day?
So really the goal for Dragonfly Rising is to support educators with integrating socially just, culturally responsive education for their students. So if that is a teacher, what does that look like in your classroom? If I'm an educational leader, how do I build these systems and structures in my school to support my teachers, the students, and the families in which we serve? So really looking to coach and provide resources and consulting for educators looking to do all of those things.
What does that look like? Because not trying to get political, but we have people that are like, oh, well, we don't need this. And school's always the way it should be, which, grinds all of our gears here. But what does that look like? Why is that so important? I know why it's important. You know why it's important, but let's hear it.
Oh, that's such a loaded question, but it's not a loaded question because there is diversity within our schools. And so when we think about diversity, we should be wanting to connect and celebrate all of the difference that exists in schools. So when people say, oh, it was fine, it wasn't, because it was only one perspective that was being honored, celebrated, allowed, is the quote unquote correct, right, way of being in the world. And we know that that isn't true. We have not even just, even if you think outside the United States, right? Humans have such a diverse culture, experience, and this isn't just about race. And I think I want to make that clear. People hear diversity, equity, and inclusion and think we're always talking about race. That is one facet. It is a socially constructed facet, which is something I'm not going to really get into. But, if you want to learn more about that, you can ask me and I'll tell you. So it's about culture. It's about gender and gender representation. It's about family. It's about, right, all the things that make up humans. So it is important because if you think about, I always tell people, think about this. If you were sitting in a classroom, and everyone has this experience, and you had zero connection to what was happening, like your teacher's up there doing X, Y, or Z, what are you doing when you feel disconnected from what's happening in this space?
Panic, freak out, just like anxious. I'm getting anxious thinking about it. Yes.
Or you're bored, or you're distracted, you disengage, all these things. Because if you don't ever feel a connection to the space you're in, or if you don't ever feel welcome or valued in the space, gosh, that makes it really hard to learn, doesn't it?
It does.
So that's really what equity is about, is seeing that. And we have a history of saying, oh, I don't see that. Well, that's devaluing the people that are in front of you. And everyone has culture. Everyone. White people included. Right? Like,
yes.
So it isn't a blame game. It isn't, this is wrong. It is, how do we see and notice and value the stories of the individuals within our educational space, or any space, really, that we're in?
Well, and it does start at education. I mean, I work with a lot of people all over the world, and a lot of English is not their first language. And I somewhat speak Italian, but don't quiz me. When my cousins come here, I'm like, wait, slow down. It's too fast. But anyways, it's so important because there's so many cultural norms in a work setting or how people present themselves, or if English is not your first language. I mean, what one word translates to English is not the same that translates to Spanish, German, Italian, whatever that looks like. I think what you're doing and starting at the core of education, so people do grow up and understand like, oh, like this is just normal. This is not just, oh, have to unlearn these biases or just what that looks like. Like, how could that be questioned and not be a great thing?
I don't know. I really, like, just to be honest with you, like, I don't know. It literally boggles my mind how people think this is against other people when the literal definition of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging includes everybody, right?
Yes.
People are like, well, how do I do that? I think people think it's always this big thing, and it doesn't always have to be a big thing. There are small things that you do every day that are probably already culturally responsive, right? Or equity minded or based. Sometimes we just need someone else to shed a little light on what we're doing because we don't see it for ourselves. So I think that's one of the great reasons to have a coach. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to work with educators and coach them, because it's really about listening and what you're bringing to the table. And it's just building on what you're already doing. I'm a guide to move you forward, just like educators in their classroom are guides for students, moving them forward. I think we all benefit when we have someone to be a sounding board, to highlight things that we may not recognize in ourselves that are happening, good and bad, right? Because sometimes we need someone else to highlight something and be like, oh, what? Okay. Have we thought about it this way? And just ask the question and get our mind moving.
Right. And having those conversations. And I'm trying not to get on my soapbox, but it's very hard. I love what you're doing. Now, I don't want to say your business is in its infancy, but you just starting this in the last few years, where do you ideally want to take it? I mean, if I'm a career genie and I grant you what this looks like, and I hate the whole, what's the next 5-10 years? But where do you see the future of Dragonfly Rising going?
Well, of course, my hope is that we are daily working with school districts and educators and leaders to make change in schools that ultimately affect the students and the educators within the school. So it becomes a positive environment, that we're connecting that back to communities. So that looks like, right? We have coaching going on. We have professional development going on. Like, we have systems to make change, not just you brought Dragonfly Rising in for this one-off PD. No, that's not a thing, right? Like, how are we building the systems and structures to maintain what is happening? Because for me, this is always about the experience for the students ultimately, and how that changes their opportunities later on. And I feel like educators just get such a hard, they're just looked down upon so much from society, right? Like, they were the champions during COVID, and everyone was like, take my kids back. And then it was like, now it's gone again. And I say this, that education is the one thing that everyone's gone through school, so they think they know. Like that asshole analogy, right? Like, everyone has like an opinion. Everyone has one. Everyone's been to school. So everyone has an opinion about what school should look like.
Yep.
You can have an opinion, and you can let the professionals do what they are supposed to do. And we forget education is not a business.
Right.
Education is about people. So when I think about Dragonfly Rising is about people and helping and supporting people, because that's what education should be about. It's about people. It's not about money. We need money to make it happen, but it isn't about money. And that's where we've gotten lost.
And it's so heartbreaking too, because I've had a lot of educators transition out, especially in the last few years. And I have to have the heart to heart and say, I want you to know this is not any representation of you and your skill set and what you've done, this system has failed you. Like, this is not your fault. And they're always close to tears. And it's always like, I don't know what to do. I can't deal with any more screaming parents. I can't deal with this. Like, I'm mentally gone. Like, I'm a shell of who I was. And I can't imagine.
Yeah. Well, and there's this narrative in education that society puts on educators that they take on, right? That if you aren't always doing something for education, or if you have a boundary around wanting to do things for your life, that makes you a bad teacher or a bad educator. And that is just not true. There's so many, it's just not true. It's not true, period.
Right.
Right. And I think there's so many ways to take the skill set of being an educator and what you know about teaching and facilitating and learning. And teachers make a million decisions a day.
Yes.
And have to manage and navigate. Like, if you think about it, they're like managing a team of like 30 cats.
Mm-hmm.
Like 30 little humans. Like, if you're managing a team of adult humans, that can sometimes be a challenging enough. But these are like young, developing humans. So there's a lot. They bring a lot to the table. And I always like hold out hope that they're going to get the recognition they deserve, and that their voices are going to be valued. And there's power in their collective voice. That's one of my things, is like, how are you using your voice today? I say that all the time at Dragonfly Rising. How are you using your voice?
Ooh.
Because there's power with your voice. Don't let someone silence your voice. Be collective in your voice. That is how change happens.
And a lot of people need to hear that, especially educators.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Now, tell us about your podcast. It's so well done.
Oh, thank you so much. I love doing the podcast. I really do. I love it. So the purpose of the podcast is to not only provide some of these actionable steps, right, for educators, but it's also to talk with educators who are doing this already and hear directly from educators, because that is one of the things, right? Like, I'm not currently in a classroom. I've been a classroom teacher. I've been a professor. I've been there and done that, but I'm not doing it at this moment. So for me, it's also about amplifying the voices of the people that are doing that, because I really believe in the power of community, whether that's people that I know, people that I follow and I learn from, supporting and amplifying those voices. So the purpose of the podcast is to help people learn more about how to do things with equity in their classrooms that they're interested in, and to hear from others that are doing the work so they can think about, oh, I could probably do this in my classroom. So I love it because each episode where I have a guest, they end with like a pro tip for an educator looking to do the work from their perspective. And it talks about equity work as a journey versus I just did this. It's one thing. I read it. Like, it is a marathon. And so you're always learning. So that's really the goal of the podcast, is just to share with educators, talk with educators. And I learned so many things from the podcast too, from the guests that come on the show.
I can relate. I've learned so much about you today too. And we've talked many a times.
Yes, I know. That's the best part about people, though.
Same. I love and hate them both at the same time.
Well,
right?
yes, some people are more challenging than others. But there are so many great people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I've met great people through people. So I'm always looking for guests, by the way, on my podcast. So if you want to, you're doing something, you should hit me up.
And what kind of guests? Here, plug it.
K-12 educator, a K-12 educational leader, university professors working with pre-service teachers on equity work and how to do that when they leave. Yeah, you're an educator. Hit me up. Doing something with equity. Yeah.
There we go.
Shameless plug there. Shameless.
Hey, it's not shameless. It's great. Do it. This is what I had you on for. I told you to promote yourself and the badass that you are. Come on.
Oh, I just gonna hang out with you all the time because you keep telling me I'm a badass. Like, I feel like I know that in my heart, but it's also so great just to hear you say that.
I also am like, oh, when people kept telling me like, oh, your confidence. I'm like, I'm not confident. And then I'm like, oh, I love when other people tell me that. So I try to be that person. I'm like, no, tell people what they need to hear because you are. Myself and my whole team looked at I was like, oh my gosh, I just met this woman, Tami, and go look at her LinkedIn picture right now. So if you had a huge influx in people from the Resume Rescue looking at your profile, It's because we were hyping you up behind the scenes, just so you know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. My amazing photographer, Emma.
Was this the one you talked about, or is this a different one?
No, this is the one I talked about, like where she just captured like the essence of me in that one photo. And then, oh my gosh, what's the hype women? What's her name?
I lost. I know who you're talking about, though.
Yes. She had some post on LinkedIn with her picture. And I'm like, that is a fucking badass picture. And I need to take my picture and make that my profile picture. Because I think I had like a normal headshot picture at one point. But I was like, no, that's me. That's it. There's that one. And there's one where I'm on a couch and I'm just like leaning back. There's just all this energy, like standing in your...
all this fuck with me energy.
Like I'm just here in my power, right? Like I am in my person. My person is my power. So, but thank you. Thank you. I love that photo so much. It's actually like one of my favorite photos ever.
It should be, because it's one of my... I think it's my favorite headshot I've ever seen. So
yeah.
And it's so interesting, too, of course, because thinking about power and thinking about being in your own power and whatever you believe in, even just hearing your story of how many people are intimidated by you, or that very first educator who wanted to separate you and your friend who were doing ultimately better for the school and for students. I mean, I think it's just a lesson to learn, because it used to really bother me, of course, when people would question me or talk down to me, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should stop. But once you start with your voice, and I know a lot of people listening to this need to hear this, you attract the right people. I mean, I think I told you on when we first met and got connected, I was like, I just love you. Like, you are just awesome. Like, you attract the right people. And I'm so blessed to have met you, of course. And I was like, podcast now. I don't even need to hear your whole story. Like, I love you 5 minutes in, like, let's get you scheduled. And it's the right people come into your energy. And I don't know if you agree with that, but it makes a big difference when you stop caring.
Absolutely. Because this is what I say this all the time too. When you show up as your whole and true self, you give people the space and opportunity to show up as their whole and true self. So you doing that models that for other people. And it's not always easy. Like, it's not always easy because sometimes you're like, oh, like it gets exhausting, right? But I have never regretted anything that has happened because I have stood in my own truth and been my confident, full self. I am not responsible for your feelings of whatever those feelings are when I have not done something to you, right? I said the exact same thing about you. I just want you to know, like, I was like, oh my God, I love her. We'll be friends. Like, she is my kind of woman, like literally. And I think I only talked to you for 15 minutes. Like, I was like, that's my kind of people.
It's a love affair.
That's what I told everybody.
Appreciate you.
Again, I think that goes back to, right, when you're around the right people and there's room for everyone. I don't lose anything by celebrating you and your success and lifting you and your success up, or your talent, or any of those things. That doesn't diminish me or my person in any way. I love that about the women that I surround myself with, or actually really the people I surround myself with, right? They're encouraging, they're uplifting, they're supportive, and they are their true people. I don't like shady people. I don't like people that are two-faced people. That just doesn't sit well. That conflicts with my values, right?
It does.
And being direct isn't mean. It's just direct.
No. I just had this conversation. Who did I have it with? One of my good friends. And it was like, oh, whole life. So it's like, oh, you're just a bitch. If I had $1 for every time I got called aggressive, we'd be retired on my yacht right now. And I always kind of fed into that. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just a bitch. I'm just a bitch. But I'm like, no, I'm really not. I'm actually a really nice person. I'm really honest. I'm really caring. And I think it's more, let's use that synonym for authentic. And I'm more of your cheerleader. Like, that's what it is. And if you're intimidated by that, and I quote, you said, I am not responsible for the way you feel.
Yeah. And I'll just throw in, they wouldn't say it about a man.
Hell no, they wouldn't. Nope. If you've listened to this podcast, you've heard my horror stories many a times, and Tammy's got me beat. So you've given us some light on some of those that you've been through of corporate horror stories, but it's just so interesting. And especially if it's a boss, if it's a partner, a friend, someone that's just not I say check your energy. Like, do you feel good? Do you feel like you can run a marathon is what I like to say. Great. Good people. If you feel like, oh, I just want to go cuddle in bed and disappear from the world, probably not your people you should hang out with.
No, yeah. If you have to hide a part of yourself to be around those people, they aren't your people. And that's not your space. You don't want to keep working there either, right? Because they should value who you are and what you bring into the space.
Exactly. Now, you've already given so many great pieces of advice, but what final parting words, because it will cut us off at an hour. So what parting words of wisdom, outside of what you've already said, do you have for the good people that listen to this podcast?
I'm just going to go back to what I already said, because I really believe this with my whole heart. Show up and be your true and authentic self. And the things that are for you will be there for you. And you will be with the people that are supposed to be for you. And a no or rejection isn't always the end of the story. In fact, it's usually the beginning of the next story into a space you never could have imagined that is even better for you.
You need to put that on a t-shirt, on a sticker, on something, because I want to buy it. I'm like, I need a motivational something every day. That's amazing. Tami, you are one of those people. I always feel so inspired, and I'm just so thankful our paths crossed. So thank you so much. And if you're listening to this podcast, you want to check out Tami, check out her podcast, all the badassery that she is, head to the show notes and tune in next week for another episode of That's Business.